Welcome to the Modern.NET Show. Formerly known as the .NET Core Podcast, we are the go-to podcast for all .NET developers worldwide, and I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode, I spoke with Irina Dominte about web development and API design. The conversation we had covers topics such as building a strong foundation, learning cloud technologies, adopting modern technologies, API design and development, the importance of testing, and choosing the right approach. With practical tips and a simplified approach, this episode provides a wealth of knowledge for those looking to excel in web development and API design. We also discuss RESTful APIs and how it's very likely that you've created REST-like rather than RESTful APIs in the past.
Yeah, so I never done a fully REST API in production, to be fair. To me and to the book, a real REST API is the API that actually respects the REST constraint, the 4 of them, not the 6 of them. So it has the first constraint as being the client-server architecture. Right? There is 2 entities involved, the client and the server, that need to talk to each other. And then we have statelessness. Like, we're using HTTP, we shouldn't keep state as we used to do with, older versions of .NET. So everything should be self-contained in that specific request or response, why not? Okay, so then we have the cache. It should be, your resources should be able to be cached. Like, the server marks the response as being cacheable, the client understands and looks at the header and so on. So state machine-wise, using the right verbs, right?
Plus, we discussed the recent release of Irina's comprehensive book on the subject, Web Development for Absolute Beginners, and why it's an essential purchase for anyone wanting to learn how to create web-based APIs with modern.NET. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and we'll dive into the core of modern.NET. So, Irina, thank you ever so much for spending some time with me this afternoon. I really, really appreciate everyone that comes on the show to talk about some stuff. So, and we're in slightly different time zones, as is always the case with me. But that's fine. I'm the one who has to deal with that. That's not a problem. But yeah, thank you very much and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Hey, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. So I wonder, would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, like a elevator pitch or something, just to get us started, just so that then everyone knows a little bit more about Irina?
I'm a software architect working as a consultant with a passion for teaching and public speaking lately. And of course, I love everything around .NET. I'm a Microsoft MVP for developer technologies. And for about 5 years, I discovered that I like to public speak and write articles around .NET. Not as often as I would like to be fair, but I have several drafts, 100 of them, that are waiting still to be finished and published. But it's not an elevator pitch. I don't like to talk about me, but I think this sums it up.
Sure. I know the pain of getting a blog article finished and ready to release is real. It's very much like software in that it's never finished. My own experience is 2015 through to 2018. I used to write about .NET things, and then .NET Core started to be a thing. So I pivoted, started writing about that. And the main reason why this podcast started was because in the early months of 2018, I was like staying up until 3-4 o'clock in the morning going, should that be a comma or should it be a full stop? I don't know. And so, I didn't want to do that again. That's what I'm saying.
So true. It's hard to find your right words to explain a concept, and then just find the right phrasing for it, and the code to exemplify it, and so on. It's not easy.
It's not, and the people who can do it on a regular basis, thumbs up, all power to them, because I just can't. I found that I was writing like 1,500 words every 2 weeks. and code samples to go with it. And I was like, it's not for me. I can't do this.
Yeah, I guess that's why I have so many drafts. I start that could be a good article, interesting for someone, but then I just stop, or I don't have the time to get to it, or
Sure.
I will have to admit it, or I don't find it to be as quote unquote perfect as I would like to be, so it never gets published.
No, I fully understand that. Absolutely, it's not something for me. That's for sure. I find it easier just to talk and then hire an editor, and then he can make what I say vaguely sound human. It's fine.
I guess that's why I have 100 drafts, because I never find the right form for an article, or I haven't I don't find as I like it to be. And then I say, okay, this won't be published anymore. So it stays and dies in draft mode.
Sure. I understand that. I also feel as though it's probably more of a thing from maybe 2-3 years ago, but I felt like there was this big push before everyone was sent to their rooms. We don't talk about the events that happened over the last few years. We just use metaphors. But before the event, when everyone was sent to their bedroom, I found that there was a lot of like, oh, you must create loads of content and it has to be out there because otherwise no one will know who you are. And there was this big drive for just create the stuff. I don't care if you're staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, create it. And it's not for me.
Indeed, it is hard to publish a piece because it's not meant for everyone to do it. I mean, let's face it, there are some people good at, I don't know, talking and stuff, presenting and writing. I think it's a totally different area.
Totally.
And we're not supposed to be good at everything, right? So
absolutely right. We're supposed to be the specialists. That's what we are. We're the experts, right? That's that old YouTube video. You know, the expert, that comedy sketch. You know, that's what we are. We're not the generalists, but what do I know? But speaking of which, you know, you're saying that you have trouble with getting things published. I mean, you've just written a book, so you can't have that much trouble.
Yeah, well, I recently, I said to myself that I'm going to do something important while on my maternal leave. I have a small kid, 2 years old, little girl. So I said, I'm going to try to combine the career and the motherhood and stuff like that. And it has always been on the back of my mind that maybe since I teach, and one thing that I didn't tell about me is that in my spare time, I'm also teaching .NET to people that are trying to switch careers and get into IT. And I teach C# and, well, .NET, because that's what I like to teach about. So twice a year, 5 months, I'm doing these classes. And I said, why wouldn't I do something that is useful for these people, or to people that are trying to, I don't know, switch domains? They're working in IT, but they did mostly desktop apps, I don't know, mobile whatsoever, and they're trying to learn web. So then is when I decided that, okay, I'm going to write a book on this. And I proposed it to my editor, and they agreed that it's a good idea. So I'm looking forward to see if indeed it's a good idea, and if people are actually, I'm looking forward for the feedback on that.
Excellent. Yeah, I just I have full respect for anyone who finishes writing a book. I've had a couple of different ideas in my head floating around, but I've never actually been able to find the discipline to actually sit down and do it. And, you know, I don't have small little ones who demand my attention all the time. So full respect to you.
Oh yeah, I've been spoiled to be honest, because I had my in-laws, I had my husband help me, and since the beginning of the year, I had the little one going to daycare, so I had like a full job, 8 hours for me to write the book, and indeed it was a task that I heavily underestimated. So if someone would come to me and say, hey, write a book on this, I would never do it again. So yes, I finished it because I don't like to leave things unfinished, but it wasn't an easy task since I underestimated everything.
Sure. Yeah, I have been told that it's not something you do with like I can't even think of the word, with like a lack of respect for the amount of work that goes into it, right?
Yeah.
Because it unlike in software, there is an actual deadline, right? We can always sort of grumble about, oh, well, maybe we need another few weeks to fix this, and there's a little bit of tech debt there. But when it goes to print, and it will be printed onto dead trees, there is no software patch you can fire out there and release. So, yeah, it's a monumental task of getting stuff done.
Exactly. And it's there to stay. So it's on print. Your words are there written.
That's true. But then, of course, you can then say to the family, look at what I did, and show them the thing that you did, right?
Indeed. And I'm going to frame it. Put it on my wall across my desk.
Don't blame you at all. Don't blame you at all. So what is the book then, and what does it cover? Because we've talked a little bit about it, and we've talked about how you do teaching in your own time and help people get started with .NET. Like, is it .NET? Like, let's start there.
Yeah. So basically, I'm trying to provide a step-by-step path into learning web and web API. So I've taken an approach that I've used previously with my students. I'm trying to keep it just bare minimum, not to overwhelm the reader in this case. And I'm trying to, I tried, and I hoped I actually managed to do that. In the book, I tried to keep everything as simple as I could, with simple examples, easy to understand, because switching careers or switching into web from other sides of the IT world, it's not an easy task to do. And to be honest, whenever I've seen, 1,000 pages books, IT books, it's daunting to see them. I mean, it's like a chunk of paper, like, okay, go ahead and read that. Well, I might start, but I might not finish. So that's what I've tried to avoid, basically. Heavily written, everything.
Sure.
So I'm trying, and I'm covering the basics like web API, introduction to web, how you set up the environment with everything in .NET. And then slowly I'm speaking about what are the web API's building blocks. Then we're moving into working with an ORM, what it is, stuff like that. Then slowly organizing our code. We're talking about routing, middlewares. And then we're slowly progressing to it. Let's call them advanced concepts. But those concepts are not advanced, with 15 years experience in IT, those might not be advanced. But in the book, there are advanced for people that are just trying to learn a thing. We're talking about model binding, API versioning, documenting your API, and testing the API, which is a thing that I've seen it very often as being not important in the projects I've been through.
Sure. I fully appreciate. Sorry to interrupt you there. I fully appreciate the idea of, let's not write a book that's 1 million pages long and that is, a foot thick, right? Because it's very daunting as a developer, as a beginner of anything, to be presented with this textbook and say, read this from cover to cover and you'll get it, right? We each have a whole bunch of experience with programming and programming languages and all sorts of stuff. So we're able to apply the knowledge from one framework and one language to another pretty easily. But I remember at university, I took Japanese language, and the very first day the teacher plonked down this massive textbook and said, right, by the end of the second year, we'll have covered all of that. And I'm like, that this is scary. This is, this is a thing that I could hold open a door with this book. It could be a doorstop. It's not good to receive a huge amount of information all at once and say, just work your way through it. So what I'm trying to say is I really appreciate that you're thinking about the reader, thinking about the amount of time and effort that someone can realistically put into this, and saying, right, how do I produce something that is the right amount of information, but in a format, I guess, that is accessible and easy to make their way through. So I just wanted to say that, right? Because that's something that I feel like a lot of tech writers forget about. They're like, I'm going to brain dump all my stuff. It's going to be 5,000 pages and you're going to love it. And then people pick it up and read the first 10 pages, then put it back down and never read it again.
Indeed, I've seen books where each chapter could have easily been another book. So one thing I learned from my students is the amount of information that you give them. So they feel overwhelmed whenever they're finding, I don't know, some of them told me, hey, I started uni. I didn't want to continue with uni, but then I started to learn on my own, and I started to find resources on the internet, and I clicked around, and it seemed like I would never stop. So I don't know which information I have to keep and which information is I don't have to know that, and so on. One thing that I learned from my students is that you do not have to know everything. So if you're focusing on learning web API in this case, you might as well just focus on that. Any other thing around that can be like a building block to use afterwards. So I don't know, I do not need to know maybe about Blazor if I'm learning web API right now. When I know about web API, yes, then I can choose another path and learn about Blazor or Maui or any other thing that is connected to it. But until then, let's just keep it simple. Focus on the minimum things that we really need to know. And at the end of the course, my students have one goal, either to get a job in IT, either to manage very well into the IT world, like get a job or switch jobs and stuff like that. So some of them have told me, hey, it has been very easy for me to learn all the things that you gave me and you taught me, because I know for sure I don't have to worry that you need to know about that and that might be a good candidate for me to know, because you know exactly what people will ask at the interviews. So for C#, right? So you need to know the language, the basics. Okay, any other syntactic sugar on top of it can be learned after you know the basics of C#. Basic instructions like, I don't know, operator, if, else, loops, stuff like that. If you want to know, I don't know, pattern matching, stuff, records, yeah, you first need to know OP. So object-oriented programming, right? And then, I don't know, sprinkle some sugar on top of it. But sure. The basics needs to be there. And that's what I tried to do in my book. Just the basics.
Sure. And that makes sense, right? Because you can't build a house without good foundations. And I'm a bit of a metaphor person. The long-time listeners of the show will know this. But yeah, if you don't have good foundations for your house will collapse and everyone will be upset. And you can't have a knowledge base to work from without good foundations. And so you're right. Yeah, if I want to learn pattern matching, I'll need to learn some other stuff first, because I need the background context to learn the other stuff, right? It's like learning any language, right? Because effectively you're learning the language that the computer speaks, right? Once you've learnt the grammar, aka the syntax, the if, then, if, else if, switch, do, that kind of thing. Once you've learned that, you can literally do anything. It's just a matter of learning the vocabulary. And I feel like pattern matching is kind of like a vocabulary more than syntax. But, what do I know? I think I'm stretching a metaphor a little bit too far here.
Another thing that I want to add in here is that There is this sides in .NET where like you are using I don't know, repository pattern, or you're using the DB context. You're using underscore notation for fields, or are you using this? So there is like my way is the best way and your way is the wrong way. So I chose in this book to use my way and to not care about what different side of IT are saying, just because I realized there is method in my madness. So I'm trying to use this across the book, and I keep using this pattern, for example, just because it gives the reader a context awareness that the underscore notation doesn't. Okay, if you use this, so it's a state that's inside the class, and that's why I'm keep using it. So during the writing of this book, I kept having like polls on Twitter. Hey, what do you prefer, this or that, and this or that? So I did the market study, but I chose my way in the end, just because it helps people learn step by step. So if you're using this, it's very easy afterwards to use the underscore and so on. Same with, are you splitting your project into libraries, or are you using just a single project and you're having folders? Well, what if we start from the basics, have class libraries, each one of them, it's on its own boundaries, stuff like that. And then knock yourself out, right? To have one project, folder, and so on.
Sure, yeah. I've recommended in the past a number of tutorials for people who want to get started in development, and then they've come back and said, but it's too complex, because these tutorials that I've recommended have said they've gone down a path and said, okay, let's learn this, but now let's take a step back and say, but actually you could do it this way, and then take another step back and say, but actually you could do it this way, and then another step back and say, but you could do it this way, and then another one, and you could do it this way. And I'm like, it's great to know that there are other ways to get there, but the important thing when you're learning something is to get there, right? If I pull up Google Maps, I don't want it to tell me there are 450 different routes to the place I want to go to. I want it to help me to pick a route and help me get there, right? Because I feel like it's very complex, our industry, and it can be complex to sort of learn it, especially if there are 12 different ways to achieve the same solution, and for some reason the person teaching you wants to teach you all 12 ways. Well, if you're right at the beginning, you don't have the knowledge and the experience to figure out, well, why are there 12 ways and which one is the best, right? Because there isn't a best.
Indeed. So I recently got a question from a young developer, like a junior developer, 2 years experience. And he asked me, hey, could you host the API, like a full API itself in Azure? Is it hard to do that? And at first I was baffled. Like, how could he ask me that? But then I realized that poor guy had worked only with Azure functions, and he had no overview about how things work. So like the bare things, like have an API, deploy it somewhere, and then Azure function being a smaller API that, well, has different things. I don't know, like consumption plan, when it runs, stuff like that. So the bare thing, the minimum thing was, okay, you have an API, you developed it. How do you expose it to the outside world? So Azure or a virtual machine or whatsoever. I was lucky enough to be able to, grow a bit with the industry in the last 15 years, and I hosted in Windows machines, and I got into RDP on those and stuff like that. But the young people didn't have that. So they might have an incomplete picture about how things work in a system, in a distributed one. It's hard for them to understand, especially when they're given just small pieces of work, like you do this, you need to do to implement this, to do that. Okay, cool. But the complete picture, they won't ever have it. because there will be no one to, tell them, hey, look how you do this, how you implement that, and how in the end your code will be up and running in Azure or whatever, AWS. So
Sure, yeah.
that's why that's what I tried to follow in the book. Okay, step by step. This is how you do it. If you want, I don't know, sprinkles on your code, yes, you'll be able to do that later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that, because there's who was it? It was Maslow, the same Maslow who came up with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If if listeners are into psychology and things like that, he was the person who said that when everything you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it sounds like this person you were talking about had, because they only had the experience doing Azure Functions. How do I turn that? You've given me this thing with 4 million files in it, and Azure Function is one file with one method. How do I go from this to that? How do I? So yeah, I totally, fully, 100% appreciate that. And I think that, like you said, I think that we are lucky in that we've been around for long enough that we've seen things evolve to the point where we know where things need to split off. And because of that, we've been to conferences, we've watched the training videos, we have the background knowledge that you're trying to impart that will infer within the person, this needs to be an Azure function, this needs to be a web API, this needs to be X thing, all that kind of stuff. But that's because we also have the experience of going, well, let's go to Azure, let's go to GCP, let's go to Linode or whatever, and click around and let's see what I can make. Whereas I feel like perhaps that maybe, and I might be casting aspersions here and making things up, but I feel like maybe when you're at the beginning of the career and you're still learning it, and there's so much to learn, there might be this fear of, if I start clicking around in the cloud provider that we're using, I could run up a huge bill and get into loads of trouble, or I could get into a position where I break things. And I feel like that's a little unfair to put that situation on our juniors and the people that we work with. And I feel like perhaps they should, it's a different discussion for a different time, but I feel like perhaps they should be like almost like a playground, wrong word, but like a place that developers who are at the beginning of their career or who want to learn a new thing can actually log into it and just click around and just, I'm going to push loads of buttons and there's going to be zero consequences, right?
And see what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe I have a different learning style to the people that you are teaching. I don't know. But I do know that with some of the cloud providers, they do offer training systems. This is more to do with like Linode and things like that, where you can literally sign up. Linode isn't one of them. I've said them about 15 times now. I do apologize. But you can sign up to it and they give you like a virtual machine to connect to. And they say, right, follow these instructions and learn the thing. And now that you've learned it, let's just play around and see if we can break the virtual machine. Don't worry, we can't break the virtual machine. But if you click over here, this will happen. If you click over there, that will happen, which I think is really quite useful. And I think perhaps that's missing from the training stuff that is created for juniors. Yeah,
maybe. But I think also that is more related to the, the core concept. I mean, the junior developers are using like tons of cloud services. They know about cloud, maybe a thing that maybe I didn't knew when I was their age. But they do not know the basics. Like, okay, you have this thing, how this thing magically goes there and runs and stuff. So like low level, maybe knowledge or experience, not necessarily knowledge around the things that we do. And it's core to us, right? We do not think about those things when we're doing those, because we know them by heart.
Sure.
But they don't know.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, you're right. I think there's a difficult decision for people who are way smarter than me. And, that needs to be a decision of how do we help these folks to do this, because things have gotten so easy, right? I remember the first time that I published anything to Azure, it was a case of, right, I need to do all these hundreds of steps and get permission from this person and drag this thing in and do that. And actually now inside of Visual Studio, I don't use Visual Studio these days, but if I'm using Visual Studio, I can right click and push a button, and then 30 seconds later, a minute later, my app is there. Which is great for that first initial getting started. It's not great for the whole DevOps pipeline stuff, but that's stuff that you can learn, later, right? Being able to right click and get it running in front of you, and be able to send a link to someone and say, "Hey, check it out! I made this thing." That's the best feeling, right?
The tooling is awesome nowadays. I mean, I remember a time when I don't know, logged into the server and I keep moving DLL files to the machine and restart IIS and stuff like that, because, well, those were the times.
Yep. Those are still the times with some companies.
Yeah,
I won't
indeed.
name names, but and you know what? Whilst it's not brilliant compared to how we do things in like more modern paradigms, if it still works, then
Exactly.
and if you're still happy to take the risk of what if someone deletes the wrong file and is unrecoverable, then that's totally fine. You do you. It's just not for me. Excellent. So you want to get people started with Web API in .NET. So I guess the important question is, are we talking .NET Framework? Are we talking .NET Core? Are we talking .NET 6, 7, 8 plus, the thing that I'm calling modern .NET? Where does it sit?
It sits with .NET 7 because I do not wish the .NET framework to die, but it's old and we evolved so much since the first release of .NET Core. So now to me is .NET Framework is just a old reference that we have to talk about whenever is the case. But the modern apps should be using .NET Core, whatever the version, long-time support being it should use .NET modern version.
Sure. And I suppose for someone jumping in, learning the slightly older technology would not be a great first step, right? Because if I do a Google for how do I do model binding in .NET, it's not going to be .NET Framework that comes up, is it?
No. No. So, I mean, there is no point learning something that won't be used. I mean, it is used, but it is used in a few companies where have big projects, expensive to change and stuff like that. And I mean, C# is an older version with .NET framework. The tooling won't be so great, so why not start with something that it works in a browser? You can play around in the playground. Try .NET and you'll have there the C# console running.
That's one of my favorite things to do, is to point people at try.net. Try.net. Yeah.
Right. Drop the dot or
yeah. I think I dropped an extra dot in there. But yeah, try and then a period. Exactly. DOT period net. And it is fully working in your browser. There's a lot of things you can't do. Yeah. But it's a great place to actually try something out. So, and you don't need anything other than a browser. And guess what? Almost every operating system ships with a browser. Mm-hmm. I had to say almost there because there'll be certain Linux distributions that don't. So, I don't want to get the pedantic people upset. But yeah, almost every, and I'm pretty sure it'll work on your phone too. So, you don't even need a computer. So that's pretty cool. So we're talking about, the thing is, I feel like, much like with what you were saying about syntactic sugar, you can learn the other things once you've got the basics, right? C#, it has evolved quite a lot since the .NET Framework days. And .NET Framework, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I am an MVP, but I'm not on the inside track. As far as I'm aware, .NET Framework isn't going anywhere, right? It is still here to stay. It's not being killed off. It's not being jettisoned. It's not being anything like that. I actually... Side note, I actually talked to Scott Hunter at MVP Summit this year and apologized to him because there was an episode of this show that went out where someone took a quote out of context and said, the sky is falling, .NET Framework's going away. And it's like, no, it isn't. And Yeah, he got a lot of flack for that. So I actually went up to him and went, look, Scott, I'm really sorry. This is what happened. It was 4 years ago, but I'm still upset about it, and I want to apologize to you. And he was like, dude, it's fine. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so the point I'm getting at is that you can totally, in my opinion, learn modern .NET, and then if a project comes up where you work, where you have to do some .NET framework stuff, it's a case of, cool, I know the modern .NET stuff. How do I learn the retro .NET stuff?
Sounds very good, retro.net.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm still trying, and I'm still preaching the fact that .NET, it's not just Windows anymore. I don't know how long it will take to teach people in, I don't know, the IT world that, hey, when you say .NET, you're not saying implicitly Windows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think though that's maybe a thing. It will take a time to change, I think, but I think that's more because, I mean, how many things do you have to do at work? Right, we've got to do a whole bunch of stuff, right? And I feel like you and I are a little bit different to most devs in that, we're creating content, we're putting stuff out there, and we're relying on the people who are excited about it enough to learn it in their own time to then know what the new stuff is. Mm-hmm. So I fully appreciate that there's lots of people who don't know that .NET is cross-platform, and that's totally fine. But that means that I can then go to them and say, cool, come over here and check this awesome thing out.
Let me tell you a story.
.NET and it's on Linux. Yeah, right? Let me tell you something. Because I remember one of the first builds of .NET Core that I was playing around with, I was doing something on a Windows machine, and I was like, cool, I don't get the point. It runs on my Windows machine. And then I copied the files onto a USB, moved over to my MacBook Air. It was a 2011 MacBook Air, so it was an Intel chip and all that kind of stuff. Plugged the USB in, and I was like, I'll try and install it and see what happens. And I was like, holy moly, it runs. Like, this is .NET on a Mac, and I'm not doing anything with mono. This is just weird. So, yeah, I totally appreciate that. That's because I was excited about doing that. Yeah. And some people don't have the chance to do that outside.
Oh yeah, it was totally about that. It was very interesting to me, and I kept talking about it when I hosted APIs as Linux services. I was like, oh my god, we're able to do that. Look how it works.
Yep. If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it. Well, I mean, I'm going to bring him up again, but hopefully this will get his attention. He'll be on the show. But Scott Hunter, in the very first ASP.NET stand-up that they did back in 2014, it was Scott Hunter, it was Damien Edwards, it was Scott Hanselman, and nearly said Scott Pilgrim then, Scott Hanselman, and they were talking about, we're going to try and get this .NET V Next, it was called. We're going to get this going. This is the thing we're working on. And I believe it was Hanselman said, but why? Explain to me what we're doing, right? I mean, obviously he knew he was using a Socratic method. He was pretending to be the audience. And I will remember it. I remember it to this day. Hunter said, Linux servers. I want you to be able to run your apps on Linux servers. And, that's where we are now. And it makes perfect sense, right? Azure has a whole bunch of Linux servers. Why can't we run our .NET apps on them? boom, now we can.
One of my top performing articles was about running an API as a Linux service. I was amazed how many people have looked that up.
Fantastic. Okay, so if we come back to the book for a moment, then you said earlier on that eventually, in like the second half of the book, I believe it was, you get onto ORMs. So does that mean that you're going to cover databases as well, or is it just a case of, hey, put this code here and magic and then database? Like,
no, I didn't. Wrote about what's an actual database, like how to normalize databases, stuff like that a DBA is supposed to do, but I'm talking about entity framework core, of course, and we're starting with a database already made, and we import it in our code, and then we do the other things around and stuff. So just to show how things would look into a real environment. So, but I'm not talking about foreign keys and concepts whatsoever, but I'm showing that, hey, since you're having an API that you're exposing, you might as well have a storage to store data somewhere.
Cool.
And I'm using SQL Server because it's easy to do. Once you have Visual Studio installed, you have everything you need in there. The default instance is there. You will be able to access it, and you don't have to, install too many things and to configure.
Sure, that makes sense. And then, I guess it then becomes an exercise for the reader. Hey, you finished the book, you've learned some stuff. Let's move your app to a Linux machine or a Mac OS machine, and we'll talk a little. This could be an exercise for someone once they've finished the book. They can be like, well, how do I move it? Well, guess what? If you learn just a little bit about Docker, you can then put a SQL Server container inside of Docker and then run your app on that. Or, if you want to change a few lines, if you want to take the time to learn which lines to change outside of the book, you can change it so you're running against a SQLite database or a MariaDB or, some database on the cloud or whatever. So I guess you're right there. It sets people up with here is the base level of knowledge. That you've got to pick one technology, right? You've got to pick one out of all of them. So we pick the one that has the most support, the most documentation, and then if things go wrong, you can go look that up. And then it's, hey, you could do it this way, or you can do it that way. If you want to go over there after you've finished, you want to go learn how to do MariaDB. Well, guess what? There's a whole page of the stuff that you will now understand because you now understand all the content in the book. Yeah, I
because
like it.
all of the concepts can be reused, or most of them at least. So you'll need a connection to a database. So no matter the database, there are a few things that you'll need. So how to configure in the API, or how to access the connection string and stuff like that. Those are reusable. So it will be very easy for the reader to look it up. Okay, MariaDB, RavenDB, or whatever DB will be modern at some point. So it's easy for them to do this exercise indeed.
Sure. So we've got an API, we've got a database. Are we doing unit testing?
Yes, we're doing unit and integration testing.
Okay.
Yeah, so during my lifetime as a developer, I've seen a lot of projects where the unit tests weren't important because they wanted us to develop functionality. They trusted us. We had manual testers to functionally test the application. So they didn't need us to spend time in writing unit tests. But then they discovered the static analysis tools and they wanted coverage and stuff like that. So to be fair, in my projects where I work as an architect, unit testing, integration testing, it's a must. There are pillars of good quality code, so you cannot do without them.
Totally. My own personal yardstick is I always, at the very least, sometimes I'm working on when I'm working on greenfield stuff, I'm like, right, let's write tests for everything as much as I can. Maybe not test-driven development, but at least tests for stuff. And if I'm working in on a pre-existing project, a brownfield project, I'm like, right, okay, give me a bug, and I want to write a test which proves that the bug exists. Because then I've got a regression test, right? Or maybe prove that I fixed the bug, right? Whichever way around, right? And I think those are, in a brownfield project, in my own personal opinion, those regression tests are way more important than proving that the system works the way that you think it works. You know?
Yeah, so in the book, I'm covering like a full flow, like a controller, fully tested, just to give the user a sense of how things would look like in production, and then I'm leaving the reader implement the other sides because they need exercise. You won't get better at programming just by reading a book or just looking at some code. Just practicing makes you better.
Sure. And then I guess once you've got so I guess it will depend on the kind of reader, but I guess once you've got the basics of how to write a unit test down, you can go, wait, hang on. So does that mean I can unit test this thing and that thing and those things? And then you just sort of apply the same knowledge, right?
Yeah. And I also talk a bit about what kind of testing we have available, what kind of tests there are out there in the wild, and then move on to do an integration test, because those are, to me at least, the ones that cover an API as it should be covered. Like entry point to the end, see what happens, test everything, mock everything around, and it will give you trust in your code. I think that for a beginner is lacking.
Sure. I've had this, I don't want to say fight, but it is that.
Debate.
With juniors and apprentices. Yeah, okay, debate. Let's call it a debate. where everyone remained absolutely, totally calm. And, the shouty voice didn't come out at all. Well, of course it did. Where I've talked to apprentices, I've talked to juniors, where it's like, no, seriously, spend 30 seconds and write a test. You'll thank me tomorrow when you don't have all the context and the code doesn't work. And then obviously that then becomes, what do you mean the code doesn't work? And I'm like, well, okay, I'll tell you what, write it without the test and talk to me tomorrow. I've been doing this for a while. I know what's going to happen.
I mean, let's be fair. When we have like simple CRUD, create, read, updates, deletes, and stuff like that, it might be easier and it might not be so obvious why do we need them. But once you're testing business logic, heavy business logic in there, that becomes paramount. So again, start with the basic things and 100%. Then evolve.
Yep, 100%. Because it's that a friend of mine calls it crunchy business logic. It's the business logic. It's the transform part of the ETL or any of those things, right? It's that part where you're taking some data in one format and applying some rules and creating data in another format. That's the bit that can go wrong. And when it goes wrong, it's not just a case of, whoops, there's a bug.
Yep.
It can be, oh, goodness, the company is closed because we've lost $10 million.
Oh, yeah.
Let's write a few tests.
And also, it gives you a focus, because when you need to mock a thing, then you need to think, hey, what do I send here? What is the expected value from that? So then it makes you think twice, and then you might realize that your business logic is a little bit flawed sometimes. So
Sure.
Happened to me.
No, I agree. Okay, so we've got an API, we've got the database, we're talking to it with Entity Framework, with an ORM, so you're explaining what that is. We've got some testing in place. Are we HTTP or are we gRPC? Or are we some other acronym that's just been made up?
Yeah, so while I love gRPC, it's in the last year has been on my workshops that I've been giving to at conferences, my talks. I study about gRPC because it's an alternative to, let's call it HTTP REST APIs. And I really love the topic. But the book covers only HTTP because I realized a lot of developers, even experienced ones, are not using the HTTP protocol at its full power. And everybody says that they're developing REST APIs. But in fact, they're just using, developing HTTP over, JSON over HTTP. So
Sure.
it's a different thing. I like to do this exercise in my talks at conferences. I sometimes, when I get the right context, I ask, hey, whoever developed the REST API? And everybody raises their hands. And afterwards, I talk a bit and explain some things. And then, okay, now, really, honestly, who here developed REST APIs? And nobody raises their hands. So to implement the REST API as REST supposed to be, it's very hard. And sometimes, I'll be fair, it doesn't add too much value. So
Sure.
The focus is for the reader to learn about HTTP protocol and to build on that, to understand the verbs, to understand status codes, and to use them.
Again, that makes sense, right? And it goes back to what we were saying earlier on about how there's years of supporting documentation around the book. You can Google for what is an HTTP RESTful service, and you get the list of verbs. Or what does HTTP status code 419 mean? And Google will tell you. Yeah. In fact, if you go to, I think it's httpstatuscodes.com or something like that, or HTTP cats or something,
cats,
right?
Exactly.
Exactly, right? It's all documented. It's all there. So if you've hit something that you maybe shouldn't have done, you can look it up. Oh, cool. There it is, right? Whereas I feel like even though gRPC has been around a while, it's still like it's catching up, right? It doesn't have that 15, 20 year plus backlog of documentation and let's be honest, SEO, right?
Oh yeah.
All that stuff, right? So
indeed, that's why I like to talk also about gRPC. I started talking about REST, HTTP, and then gRPC, because gRPC is a tech that is here to stay also. And once we know about the technology, then we can make informed decisions. Okay, we are having APIs. Awesome. We have two APIs that talk to each other. Cool. What do we use? Do we use HTTP clients? Or maybe it's better to use protocol buffers and a gRPC. So it depends, like any good architect would say, right? Sure. It depends. But for the user, totally. the one that starts to learn Web API and web, it's paramount to learn HTTP 1. So then it can learn about HTTP 2 and 3 and to learn how the things are getting transported over a specific protocol.
Sure, absolutely. And then it's immediately applicable then. If you're brand new to this is... Okay, so I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, climb on top of my soapbox. This is my worry with things like coding boot camps, because they seem very, very, very specific to a very specific niche of a problem. You're going to learn React, and you're going to do everything with Node, and you're going to use this particular library, that particular library, these versions of these libraries. I'm not saying React, Node, or JavaScript are bad at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can say the same thing with .NET, right? You're going to learn .NET 7, and you're going to use these particular libraries, and that's it. Once you've done that, you're in the industry. You never need to learn anything ever again. And then something goes wrong, or a version is updated, a package is updated to a new version, and the API changes, or something like that. And I feel like teaching folks things that are immediately applicable, that then they can actually sit there and go, wait, hang on, but it's doing the same thing as my browser is doing, except the browser is doing GET requests for a lot of stuff. Wow, I can see how this fits automatically. And I feel like with software development, it's something that doesn't really fit with other types of learning. Like if I go and learn mechanical engineering, I can immediately apply what I'm learning to how my car works. right? I start understanding that the pistons in the engine move up and down and compress a bunch of air and fuel, and then that's ignited, which pushes the piston up, which is then transformed into circular motion for the wheels, right? I can see it. If I take the bonnet or the hood off of my car, I can literally see it happening in front of me. But with software, not so much. It's all arrangements of little opaque boxes.
There is a quote, I think: the only constant in software is change. So it's always evolving. So we need to keep up. We need to always update ourselves in terms of know-how, even though some of the concepts might be reusable, and they are reusable. I mean, let's look at gRPC. Well, in a way, gRPC is replacing WCF, but it's a kind of but prettier. So there is a there is a debate that we can and discussion that we could start around it. But some concepts tend to resurface from time to time. So once you know a thing, you'll be able to at least, adapt your previous knowledge to the current things.
Sure, and I think that's the important thing to impress upon people who are learning new stuff, and that is, you're going on a journey. You're starting to learn this one thing in this one specific context, but like you said, you can apply that to other things. You can learn C# and .NET, and then you can say, "Hey, I want to go learn Python." Well, guess what? Both languages are a C family. Mm-hmm. They're both from the C family of languages. So if you know one, you can apply some of your knowledge to the other, and all you need to do is learn. So you've been taught the .NET way to program .NET. Then when you go over to Python, all you need to do is switch your brain over to, how do I learn the Python way to write Python? Mm-hmm. Not the syntax, not the commands, not the vocabulary, none of that. It's how do Python people write Python code? Which testing libraries do they use? Which IDEs do they use? They may even use a different keyboard. I don't know. I'm not a Python dev. So, all those different kinds of things, you learn those, and you're still applying that same programming knowledge from one language into another. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And one thing regarding this, I'm trying to say, I like to say that once you know C#, you're halfway into knowing JavaScript, because the syntax is so similar. So the look and feel is pretty much the same, I could say. So what you have to know is the JavaScript specificity, the small bits and stuff like that. Or if you working with TypeScript, it's easy to translate, C#-ish in JavaScript. So it won't go to waste, your knowledge. So
Sure. I always tell people that it's never a waste of time learning something. Yeah. You can always apply it somewhere, right? And that's why I do a lot of reading outside of development. I don't actually read that many development books every year, maybe one or two. But most of my reading happens outside of it. So like leadership books, business books, self-help books, language learning books, because we're learning languages, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense that you're going to learn about how the language, like human spoken languages work, because we design computer programming languages to be halfway between a human spoken language and a computer spoken language. So, but I've digressed way too much. But there's never a penalty for learning something. That's what I always tell people. So we talked about how you're using HTTP, and we talked about REST stuff. And you said how in your talks you always get people to put their hands up. Yeah, I've done a RESTful API. But then you talk a little bit more and you say, right, now that you know what a RESTful API actually is, who's done a real RESTful API? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I never done a fully REST API in production, to be fair. To me and to the book, a real REST API is the API that actually respects the REST constraint, the 4 of them, not the 6 of them. So it has the first constraint as being the client-server architecture. Right? There is 2 entities involved, the client and the server, that need to talk to each other. And then we have statelessness. Like, we're using HTTP, we shouldn't keep state as we used to do with, older versions of .NET. So everything should be self-contained in that specific request or response. Why not? Okay, so then we have the cache. It should be, your resources should be able to be cached. Like the server marks the response as being cacheable, the client understands and looks at the header and so on. So state machine wise, using the right verbs, right? There is also a thing. So the uniform interface for me is the fourth constraint that it should be in a RESTful API. So we should be able to identify resources and should be able to manipulate them, right? Using the right resources. So 4 of them. The rest I mentioned the last 2 of them, but I'm not emphasizing them in the book. An API, an endpoint of the API should be clean enough, should be easy to understand, right? If you look at an endpoint, you should be able to use the right verbs. If you have cats, right? So you will have cats and you'll look at the endpoint, you'll automatically understand, okay, this is the endpoint that deals with cats as being the many of them. So what you'll be able to do is to query the endpoint. You should be able to use get to get all the cats. You should be able to filter them using query strings, so on. You should be able also to create a new resource, right? To add a new cat. And then if you look at the individual endpoint, you'll have the cats by ID, right? So cats / the ID placeholder. And then you should be able to use 3 verbs, right, to do operation on the specific endpoint. These are conventions, but these are conventions that are there just to help us create endpoints that are easy to understand. People won't need, I don't know, extensive documentation to call our endpoints. Right, so I'm keeping this to a minimum. I explain a lot. I have schemas in the book and so on. But I think at that level, these are the things to be concerned about, right? You have HTTP, use everything, use headers to identify things that are different, use header to cache, use header to maybe transport and send information that are not, I don't know, it doesn't belong in a query string or in the body of the request, stuff like that. Use the right verbs because those are there to stay, and use the right status codes. That's why we have like 64 of them, right? Just to be able to look at those to say, hey, it's 404. What does that mean? Well, it starts with a 4. That means that is your fault as a client. And specifically, it's a not found because that's what 404 means. Or it's a 201. What does that mean? It starts with 2, it's a success one, but it means created, and it should be returned as a result of an operation that adds a new resource, right? Created. Hey. So that's how I pretty much explain REST as the concept. And I think this is how, it's just my personal opinion, but this is how REST should be looked at, just as guidelines around creating APIs that are mindful to other developers and to API consumers, basically. Because I personally lived the time when I had to read SOAP documentation to understand what should I send in there to get a response, a valid response back. But those times have passed, and we should just be able to easily create endpoints that are meaningful, right?
Sure, absolutely. Just using a couple of examples that you shared there, I have actually I've been brought in to work on maintaining a RESTful API where there was a get, you would go to /cats/get and send a get request. I'm like, that's not RESTful.
Oh yeah.
Then there was a /cats/create. I'm like, that's not RESTful. /cats/delete. That's not RESTful. And then there was a /cats/get-cached. And I'm like, are you even trying now?
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing with different representations based on, I don't know, maybe headers that are sent, like hypermedias, MIME types sent to the server. And then the server looking at the request will be able to, okay, what do you want? Okay, you want this specifically for a specific vendor that has a specific logic? Yes, here it is. But everything should be self-contained. So some people might say, hey, REST is not all about naming. No, it's not. But we can also start from there and move on, right? Using the right verbs, using headers as a mean to transfer information to the server and back. Why not? Caring about whatever is transported in the header. Taking into account content type and accept, because that's why they made it into the specs. So, yeah.
Sure. So I guess then, is it even possible to go full REST? And not restful, but full REST. Maybe that should be a talk title. Know. Are you restful or full REST?
Now that you mentioned it. Yeah, I think it is possible. But one thing is lacking around libraries. I found it very difficult to implement the hate OIS part. Like basically the server should be able to drive the client, right? And with each response, it should be able to say, hey, you're here. These are your next steps. You can go to this specific URL or to this specific URL. You choose, but these are the only two options. Yeah. So the client should be like, let's call it dummy, but it should be able to look at those links sent with the response to be able to navigate the server. I found it lacking in terms of libraries that help you do that. Because, well, the community didn't invest in it because it haven't seen the value of it, I think.
Sure.
So, I mean, some of our colleague developers are saying we're not doing that because it's performance penalty to send with each response a section with links to allow the client to go to specify where to go next. So that's one thing that I think it's lacking in terms of libraries.
So my question to those folks, and it's a genuine question, I'm not making fun. What kind of thing are you doing where the performance will be negatively affected by adding a couple of kilobytes, maybe even a kilobyte of extra text, right? What are you doing?
The actual generation is a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm not making fun. Yeah. I'm interested to know what those particular folks are working on that requires that to be able to squeeze that extra little bit of performance out. And I don't know. I'm digressing way too much here. But so do you think that that HateOS, I'm always confused as to how to pronounce it.
Yeah, me too. But that's why I say hate OIS.
So is that the only way to be properly RESTful then? Because then it's returning some stuff and it allows you to. But then you said as well that it depends on like headers that you include and saying the server saying, hey, I am accepting this kind of data in. So like maybe there isn't a one process fits all when it comes to being RESTful or fully REST.
For sure, there isn't one size of a REST API. But to be fair, I personally believe that the first fourth constraints are the most important. Like to me, those mean that we're actually leveraging the HTTP power, right? So if we use everything that HTTP as a transport has, headers, right? Media types, we use them properly, status codes, verbs as they should be. Because I remember a time when create and update, like as operations, were done using post. So when MVC first started, I think, and I remember the code very clearly, we had a denominator. If it had an ID that was different than 0, then it was an ID edit, right?
Yeah.
So if it was 0 or nothing, well, then you're creating an entity. So that's how we differentiate these two operations. Yeah, so I think this is how we should look at REST or at RESTful APIs, leveraging the HTTP power, using what we have available, basically.
Sure. I think that just comes all the way back to using what you have in your toolbox, but knowing what's in the toolbox.
Oh, yeah.
And so therefore it comes down to education, right?
Yep, indeed.
So go buy the book.
Thank you. Yeah, jokes aside, before the pandemic, I had to talk about REST APIs. And when I started doing that, I was, okay, who's going to listen to me? Who's going to, care about REST? And I was surprised how many people didn't know things about REST, and they were interested to know and to learn about REST, because REST as a concept it was misunderstood and not so well implemented.
100%. It's one of those things where, like, when I create brand new things, like in my own time, I think to myself, well, hang on, how do I put it? I feel like there's this leap towards, don't worry about it, we'll create an endpoint and then we'll figure it out later. And actually that's you're saying that the contract for your app doesn't matter.
Yeah.
When actually it's the contract that's the most important thing. How something else speaks to you is the most important thing. How you deal with it doesn't matter, because you could, one of the things that I do when I'm building brand new apps, if I'm just returning data, I just return an in-memory list, because I'm like, it's not going to change until I get to the point where it needs to change, until I've figured out what that contract should look like. Without knowing what that contract looks like, it doesn't matter how I get the data, right? I can fix that later. Let me work on the contract first, get that contract working. Because then when that API then looks the way that I want other people to see it, that was a really bad sentence, but hopefully you get what I mean. When it looks the way that it needs to look for other people to use it, that's when I can actually go, right, okay, the contract is sorted. I will go work on making the other side of it, my bit of it, work out. But the problem with that is that then requires you to step away from the fun bit, which is making your code work.
Yep.
Oh, gosh. So, Irina, just remind us all about the book, because we've said all of this and we haven't even talked about what the title is. So remind us about the book and how people can get it, and then tell us a little bit how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so I'm free to be able they are free to contact me on Twitter. I have my DMs open. The book is on Amazon. So Web API Development for the Absolute Beginner, a step-by-step approach to learning the fundamentals of Web API development with .NET 7. Super long title, but you get it speaks to the point. So Web API Development for the Absolute Beginner. Is the book is already available. Pre-order it. It's on Kindle available also, and on paperback.
Amazing. Okay, so it's available pretty much everywhere.
Exactly, and I'm looking forward for the feedback from the community on this. So I encourage them to give me feedback because it might have a second edition. If
you can find the time between raising the children and doing the work and writing the book, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I like I said at the beginning, my hat. We say it in British English. I don't know if it translates, but my hat is off to you. All respect to you, because I can't do that. But yeah, there you go. Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, Irina, thank you very much for sitting with me this afternoon and having a chat with me. I've really enjoyed it, because there's some stuff that I've learned specifically around being fully REST or RESTful. Like I said, that's probably a talk title, right? Get that written down quick before someone else steals it. Oh, good. Coming soon to a conference near you.
Oh, yeah.
But there's things about being RESTful and being fully REST that that I didn't really contemplate. And so I'm going to actually go away and fix a bunch of my APIs, make them a little bit better, add some extra headers and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you ever so much for sitting with us this afternoon and talking with us about being brand new to the readers of the book, being brand new to Web API. Because you see, I'll let you speak in a moment, but I've just had this brainwave. Like, it is so important when we, no matter where we are in our learning journey, to take a step back and look at the things that are aimed at people who are maybe a few steps behind us, a few steps lower than us in our journey, because there will be gaps in your knowledge, as I've just proven, right? The stuff about REST I didn't know. So there will be gaps in your knowledge. You can totally go read something that is aimed at someone who has slightly less experience, slightly less knowledge than you, to fill in those gaps. Because why not?
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to discuss.
Hey, you're very welcome. Very welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Modern.NET Show with me, Jamie Taylor. I'd like to thank this episode's guest, Irina Dominte, for graciously sharing her time, expertise, and knowledge. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at the podcast's website, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to the podcast website for a way to do that, or reach out via our contact page or our Discord server, all of which are linked in the show notes. But above all, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope that I'll see you again next time for more .NET goodness. See you again real soon. See you later, folks.